primarily involved with the facilities, but one thing that did mean a great deal to me, I worked at New Hampshire Ball Bearing for 43 years, and at that time they made miniature and instrument bearings, which are very, very labor intensive, and the company employed a great many women, mothers. At one time, between the Peterborough plant and the Jaffrey plant, I think we had 1,200 people. And you got a pretty graphic picture of how much of our population lead lives of, I guess you'd call it, quiet desperation. I saw all these women coming in. They had to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. They had to get up, they had to get breakfast for the kids and get them off to school and get to the plant by 7 o'clock. The work was intensive and very, very hard. I know because when we got behind, everybody wound up in the white room assembling bearings. And to do this 8 hours a day is tough. And if one of them, somebody had a sick child or something, they were worried about that all day long. I took great comfort from the fact that here in Antrim, we had the Grapevine that I think was just providing a tremendous service to a lot of people who were just having a very difficult time, and just the education and the support that they would get from an organization like the Grapevine would just make a tremendous difference in helping them get through the week.
I remembered what I forgot. The thing that I am primarily proud of, I will never forget it, when the discussions about this, I remember being on the second floor, third floor of the library with Andrea talking about this potential. But I also remember a community-wide meeting that was happening right here. And Andrea had, I can't remember the doctor's name. What was his name?
Weedahoe?
Oh, no.
No, but he had been in Europe for Mac something or other. Was it Mac something?
Was it Dr. McGill? Frank McGill? Yes.
No.
Okay.
He had traveled in Europe a lot, and he was very familiar with the kind of services that were available in some of the Scandinavian countries. And he talked about those. He had his massive pictures of things going on for kids and families and whatnot. And what I am proud of is the way this community responded, because it wouldn't have happened if there had not been the kind of support. And I remember the energy in the room and in his discussion about the need for attention to families with young children. And I was impressed with that then, and I continue to be pleased to be able to remember how this community responded, because it was a shoo-in.
Yeah.
I informed the members of the panel, except for Sydney, who was so quick on her feet that she didn't need to get the questions in advance. I informed them of 10 possible questions. So I'm not being mean by posing these questions. And I will say that 2 of the questions that I don't know that we'll have time for, what do you think of colonizing space? I thought that would be a good question. And Kristen was especially eager to answer question 8, which is, what is the craziest thing you've ever done on a date? But I'm not sure we're going to have time for that. I'm not sure we're going to have time for that. Okay, let me just pose one last question, then we'll open it up for Q&A. As you look back at the history of the Grapevine, what were its most difficult challenges? And anybody can start out. No challenges, okay.
Well, I guess one of the main
Here we go.
challenges would have been when the state of New Hampshire terminated its financial support for organizations like the Grapevine.
Yeah.
That was big.
Well, you lost $42,000 annually or something like that?
It was, I forget but it was substantial. I was wondering, you know, if the Grapevine could survive and continue to do what it had been doing.
Any other observations? Any difficult challenges?
I think something that we talked about over the years as a challenge was conveying to the community at large what the Grapevine was all about. Because people really weren't used to this sort of organization. We were more used to social services where people come in to get help and then the person there gives them the help. So the reciprocity, the mutual support and the interdependence that really makes up the foundation for the Grapevine is not something that people understood right off the bat. And I feel like the Grapevine is we can never stop putting that message out there. But I think that the Grapevine did finally at some point sort of tip over the edge a little bit. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the number of people in the community who participated eventually in the Grapevine. So the community got to know the Grapevine better, the more branches that grew out to the community.
Do I have time to say one more thing I'm
You
proud
sure
of?
do.
2 more things I'm proud of? Or 3, however.
Okay, we're returning to pride.
We had, with the board, over time, one of the things that that got chewed out, and talked over and planned about was the 4-town group. You haven't mentioned that? The 4-town group, and out of the 4-town group, which included Hancock, because we wanted to make sure that we were taking in as much as we could, Hancock, say the rest, Greenfield,
Francistown.
Francistown, and us. And out of those discussions, for people, various people coming to represent the town and just see what we needed to talk about, came Kentucky Valley Transportation Cooperative. Do you remember that?
I sure do.
Yeah, that was out of those discussions of the four towns. The BBC came about, that terminology and that kind of notion of being so inclusive came from meetings that I used to go to as a representative of DCYF in the community towns around Peterborough, where there were in fact many underserved kids and families. So the BBC kind of morphed into the 4-town group, which continues, and the CVTC thing, the Transportation Cooperative, came about as a result of that. And I think it's not stretching anything to say that the community suffers of the 4 towns. So when you plant a seed that has that much energy in it, you know, it's quite remarkable. I may remember other things too, but I remember the 4-town thing and the community suffers and CVTC all being part of the same.
And the wood bank, really,
And the
which
wood bank.
Ben forgot, is one of the other important critical contributions that he has made to the Grapevine over the years, as being one of the core members of the community wood bank.
I had the misfortune about a year and a half ago, it was during the winter, of helping out with the wood bank. Actually, I find it a satisfying experience, but I was working with one Ben Pratt. We were piling wood, and we piled for about 2.5 hours. He did not stop. I was exhausted after about a half an hour, lying against the wall on about 3 occasions, and he continued on as if nothing would bother him. Would you like to open up for questions from the audience?
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, back down to Angie.
Then I'll stop. The River Center, the Grapevine also became a model for the River Center in Peterborough. You know, the programs were most of the programs were first at the Grapevine, and as the River Center developed, you know, we had a model for those programs. And really, all the towns in the Kentucky River Valley are served by one or the other. Is that right? Or they try to be served. So, that's all.
Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, the list will be invoked, so you don't, you want to avoid that.
Especially question 8.
I don't know.
Carol, I'd like to hear your early, because you came in fairly early when you joined the
I think it
Grapevine.
was 2000. I was the preschool teacher that came in for all of those parents of the 4-year-olds. I was doing part-time work here and there, and I think this is what happened. Was the town in that same building at the same time?
That was
Yes.
interesting.
So the town had offices in the building, and then there was space for Grapevine programs.
That's right.
And that's the year I started, and Bob Bernstein was doing work on the ceiling in the playroom, and my husband was between jobs, and he was there helping with some wiring that's a little scary, but they did it together, and the building's still standing, so that's good. And my husband overheard someone say something about needing a preschool teacher, and I had taught at Happy Valley for 9 years, and had worked in the public schools teaching kindergarten, and was working at the Harris Center for Conservation Education at the time. And John said, my wife is a preschool teacher. So I came in and met and said, I have 2 mornings a week. And we made a plan where parents would come in with their kids 2 mornings a week and come to a parent group for the 3rd morning. And that was in 2000, and we're still doing the program. It's still a parent co-op. The links in that program to other programs, the families and the support that they've gotten as a result of being in that preschool program, and all of the connections that the Grapevine has to offer, it's been amazing. Lives have been changed as a result of being in the Grapevine. We've seen it many, many times.
Other comments or questions? I have one. Do you have any advice for future Grapevine employees and clients? What have you learned from your involvement? What advice would you give those who will be working at the Grapevine or engaged in services? Sit.
I don't know if I want to say this. I cannot think of a time in history when services of this kind are more vital now than they have been for a very long time. Our culture has changed. I don't need to tell any of us about that and the ramifications of the changes in our culture. People listening to each other, people being able to coordinate what they're thinking or needing, having trust and faith that they can share things that are troublesome with their kids or in their families. Everything isn't settled in these ways that at the tips of our fingers. And I cannot think of a service that we could provide that would be of more merit and value than to keep the, what do you want to call it, the habits of relationship and of talking and listening and really hearing and noticing, because children are changing, their lives are changing with all of this stuff that impacts on their capacity to find out what's going on every place but right here in my own heart and my own family right this minute. So my cynicism is showing, so but I think that that's enough.
Advice, lessons learned?
Question over here.
Oh, question from Rod.
You know, my observation in the live and free die state, you not only have a problem of providing services, no money, but you also have a problem of receiving services. People don't want to be beholden. And so could you comment on like because I talked to people who seem to be ideal for the time banking, for instance, or any sort of financial counseling, and they didn't didn't understand. Could you comment on that type of outreach? And, obviously you've done a great job at helping children, but could you comment on this reaching the parents and trying to see what a resource you were, and it's not a black mark to come to the Grapevine to receive help?
I think the key is to get them through the door, because once they can get through the door and talk to Carol or Melissa or Nancy with the People's Service Exchange, then they will know that they're not, that everybody needs help now and then, everybody needs support now and then, and they're certainly not alone in that, in the Grapevine. And that's really when the relationships begin. One thing that's really cool is that there are, on any given day, several different programs that might be going on and people available to talk to somebody. So there have been countless times when an individual or a couple or a family has come in, and often they're new to town, but not always, and really looking for some support in a lot of areas. And we can actually, after greeting them and sitting down and listening, they can go around the Grapevine to the different places where you can, where they can talk with Nancy about getting help through the People's Service Exchange, which you don't need to give anything to start out. But what's beautiful about that, of course, as you know, is that it's about giving and receiving. So that's just one way for people to understand what the Grapevine is all about, in interdependence. But it's really about it, and it is tricky. It is tricky. It's getting people through the door, but it's also people like you talking with somebody who is wondering if that's the right place for them, and that's the beauty of the name, really. Through the Grapevine, that's really our best marketing, if you will. It's hard to explain on paper or in any other way, really, even just describing what it's like to be at the Grapevine. But talking to somebody who's been there is probably the next best thing. So it's once they get through the door.
Other responses to Rod's question? On with advice, lessons learned, what future employees and clients should know.
I don't offer advice, actually.
Very true.
Nothing. Other questions? If not, let's thank the greatest generation of the Grapevine. That was a lot of food.
All right. Nice.
Thank you.